10th. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Madam Chair.
Here.
Senator DeMario.
Here.
Senator Archambault.
Present.
Senator Coyne.
Here.
Senator Coleman.
Here.
Senator Miller.
Here.
Senator Rogers.
Here.
Senator Valverde.
Here.
Madam Chair, there are 8 present.
We do have a quorum. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. The committee is called to order. Tonight we have a number of bills in front of us. We also have a number of individuals signed up for public testimony, and we have also received a volume of written testimony. And so it's been the practice of this committee. What I would like to do is to bring forward the bills tonight to be held for further study. This will allow us to take the testimony tonight and review the written testimony as we move forward in this legislative session so that we can work on this legislation. So with that, I would entertain a motion to hold Senate Bill 36, Senate Bill 106, and Senate Bill 220, and Senate Bill 562 for further study. And
So moved.
Senator
Second.
Coyne makes a motion, seconded by Senator Archambault and Senator DeMario. Mr. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Madam Chair.
Aye.
Senator DeMario.
Aye.
Senator Archambault.
Aye.
Senator Coyne.
Aye.
Senator Coleman.
Aye.
Senator Miller.
Aye.
Senator Rogers.
Aye.
Senator Valverde.
Aye.
Madam Chair, there are 8 in the affirmative and 0 in the negative.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And as has been the practice in this remote hearing world that we are living in, what has been easiest for us to do in the past is to take testimony so that from each of the bill sponsors so that they can introduce the bills, explain to the committee, and answer questions on each of the bills in turn. And once we finish hearing from all of the bill sponsors, we will then turn to public testimony and have the folks that we're calling in to testify on all of the bills at once in an effort to make sure that we're being respectful of the public time and the committee members' time. So with that, we will move to the first bill on our agenda, which is Senate Bill number 36. And Senator Miller, would you like to explain the bill and make comments on it?
Yes, this bill is a bill, as many of you have heard me comment, I think, in previous meetings, that I was a Senate representative, and I think there was at least 1 or 2 House representatives on the same governor's task force on plastic recycling 1 or 2 years ago, I think 2 years ago, which led to the plastic bag proposal that we're very familiar with. And to describe the committee briefly, it was put together by the governor to have both advocates, environmental advocates, and manufacturers, and those who represented the current plastic industry, current retail, including the Hospitality Association. So it was a wide and diverse group of people. And along with the plastic legislation, the plastic bag legislation that came out of it, what was also in active discussion was other legislation that potentially should come out of such a task force. And one of the efforts that also came out of this task force but didn't have unanimous support, which was the practice of the task force to move forward with legislation out of the group, was this Styrofoam legislation to ban the use of polystyrene in food service. And but it was clear from most of the environmental advocates and several others that this is consistent with the idea of a plastic bag ban, maybe even more so based on the context of us being the ocean state, and more maybe appropriately for this kind of legislation, the Narragansett Bay state, in that how toxic the plastic particulates are to both wildlife, the fishery industry, and people who live or consume anything that comes from the bay. And anybody who's ever been on a neighborhood trash pickup or a shoreline trash pickup. And the cycle of styrofoam, especially coming through into our ecosystem, is well documented. And in the past, there's been some industry concerns. I'll give the example of Dunkin' Donuts as somebody who's been concerned about this legislation historically and is now phasing off. I think they're in the second year of a 2-year phase out of polystyrene because of the environmental impact and how aware their customers are now of that environmental impact. And that's the history behind this legislation. And as you'll probably hear from advocates, what the task force focused on, and I think what we should start focusing on, is what is recyclable and what isn't. And when something is, if there's a plastic product that gets less than 1% of it gets brought into a recycling system, then it's appropriate for this type of legislation. Phase out rather than a recycle program.
Thank you, Senator Miller. Are there any questions or comments from the committee members for Senator Miller? Okay, hearing none, the next bill sponsor we will hear from is on Senate Bill 106, and Senator Culkin, welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. This bill, S-106, would create a refundable 10-cent deposit for non-reusable beverage containers and a 4-cent handling fee to be paid by distributors. I'm so happy to have a chance to put this bill in, as a bottle bill is so needed here in Rhode Island. I'm going to let the experts speak to the many impacts a bill like this could mean to our state, but I will say I have a personal daily reminder, one that lives in my house, that pushes and motivates me on this issue. My husband, Dan, who I believe will be testifying on another bill tonight, for years has spent a good portion of his free time doing pickups across the park, as well as with other organizations across the state. He will sometimes send me texts with pictures of how bad some areas are, strewn with plastic bottles, old tires, etc. And as a transplant from Massachusetts, he has always asked why Rhode Island doesn't have a bottle bill, and asked me to introduce one here when I got reelected. So as soon as I won last year, I got the, okay, now you can put the bottle bill in from him. So I took a look at last year's bottle bill and thought it would make a great start, which became the basis for this bill, S-106. I know there is another really good bottle bill on the agenda tonight, and I certainly support that one as well. So I spent some time analyzing the differences between the two bills, and I don't want to jump ahead, but Senator Valverde's bill has some really great things in it that if you were to consider moving my bill, S-106, it would be great to incorporate some of those things into this bill. And there are a few things in my bill that I've spoken to Senator Valverde about that might be considered for sub-A if her bill were to move forward. So just briefly, these things include creating a provision for reusable bottles, adding language so that the deposit transaction fund is not considered as income or expenses to avoid things like tax implications, to add language to possibly phase out the use of plastic rings or connecting devices for beverage containers, or at least require that they must be compostable and biodegradable. And then finally, to add language about not requiring containers to be accepted for return at the location of a vending machine. Like, for example, if a person is in a waiting room getting an oil change and they buy a drink from a vending machine, that the business wouldn't be expected to hand out the 10-cent refund to the by the cashier. So thank you for hearing this bill. I hope we can get a bottle bill passed this year, as it can mean thousands of bottles and containers being recycled rather than ending up in the landfill or in our environment. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Culkin. Do any members have any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. Senator Valverde, do you want to describe and give opening comments to Senate Bill 220?
Yeah, thank you, Chairwoman. Yes, as Senator Culkin said, this is another bottle bill. One of the main differences in this one is that it calls for a 3.5 cent handling fee to be paid by the distributor instead of a 4 cent one. But the other benefits of this bill are the same. Right now we have, literally tons of plastic bottles, aluminum cans, glass bottles, just ending up in our landfill because our single stream recycling system is just, it's not working the way I think it was intended to work. Without the incentive to recycle these beverage containers, it's just not happening. And we're so far behind our surrounding states. Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, Maine, they have all had bottle bills for decades. I grew up next door in central Connecticut, and I could remember, with my Girl Scout troop going and collecting cans and bringing them back to the grocery store deposit return to raise money for local nonprofits. And, I'm 38 years old, so it tells you how long that program's been in place. And, a lot of these programs are, not perfect, but they are certainly better than what we are doing right now in Rhode Island, which is absolutely nothing. So I would love to see this bill move forward as well, and I look forward to working with Senator Calkin to get it done.
Thank you, Senator Valverde. Do any committee members have any questions or comments for Senator Valverde? Okay. Hearing none, the final bill that we have a sponsor to give an overview of is Senator Miller's Senate Bill 562. Senator Miller?
So this is the Senate version, like 36, the Styrofoam bill. My co-sponsor on the House side is Rep. Bennett, and we've both heard from constituents far and wide, especially around Narragansett Bay, around litter, and this is way beyond the Bay. It goes almost to any public way, on the amount of, if everybody understands what a nip is, it's about a 1 ounce serving of a liquor that's sold in a liquor store, and it is totally appropriate to have a separate deposit of a much higher level, because they really should be tracked and recycled, and they should really be discouraged for many reasons, most of them having to do with the recycling component that we want to have happen with these. But there are other harmful impacts of these, and one of them is the pricing that's traditionally gone along with some of these products. And often when a new brand of an alcoholic beverage comes on, they're actually priced lower than if you had bought a liter of it. So it promotes illegal activity in having them actually smuggled into other retail locations, bars and restaurants and so forth, high schools, colleges, and they are often discarded very arbitrarily because they're done in inappropriate settings, to be polite about it. And so therefore the higher deposit, and it's the same phenomena that we saw in the task force, in that barely 1% of this kind of product is recycled, and they have a much higher danger of being a hazard to wildlife because of their size. And if you go to any retail establishment, school setting, even grade school setting, and you ask them about litter, or you ask a municipality about litter, and the litter caused by nips will always come up as a very high priority of both law enforcement, litter control, environmental advocates, and many others, that it needs a special treatment and therefore its own legislation.
Thank you. Do any of the members have any questions or comments for Senator Miller? Go ahead, Senator Archambault.
Thank you. Just a comment. I applaud Senator Miller on this legislation, really, for all the reasons he has put forth. But it's personal to me. On my rural farm road, every week, somebody throws out these little nip bottles with the little red toppers on them. And usually there are wrappers next to them from blunts for, they come down the road and they throw those out too, and smoke pot on the rural road. But the point is, these nips, and it's been going on for years, and it's the same type of variety of nips, and they're always all over the road, and I pick them up, and I'm tired of picking them up. So maybe with the deposit, there'll be some incentive here, and I won't see the nips in the future. So I relate to it on a personal level, and I applaud you for the environmental impact. Thanks again.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any other questions or comments for Senator Miller on this bill?
I just make one other comment on the bill is that I did talk to the House sponsor, Rep. Bennett, and he has agreed with a few requests, especially from liquor stores, and on the Styrofoam side, that both bills have an extended date. I believe it's sometime in 22, so people can work down their inventory. We both agreed that that's a credible amendment to the bill before it gets brought to the floor.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, I believe we will be going to our first caller for public testimony. And as I mentioned, we will be asking our testifiers to testify on all of the bills that they want to speak on our agenda tonight. So I believe we should have with us Kevin Boudris. Kevin, are you there?
I'm here, Chair Order.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for joining us. If you could please tell us your name, what organization you represent, if any, and the bill or bills that you're testifying on, and you can go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Order, and thank you, members of the committee. My name is Kevin Boudris. I'm a staff attorney at Conservation Law Foundation, or CLF. CLF supports Senate Bill 36, Senate Bill 220, and Senate Bill 562. And I'd like to mention also that we support adding some of the key provisions of Senate Bill 106 that were mentioned by Senator Calkin to Senate Bill 220. I've submitted written testimony, but I'd like to highlight just a few important issues on each of these bills. With respect to Senate Bill 36, polystyrene foam food containers are a particularly toxic and dangerous form of plastic. Styrene is one of the building blocks of polystyrene. Styrene is a known carcinogen and can cause harmful health effects like anemia and reproductive damage. Facilities that manufacture polystyrene foam emit styrene in huge amounts, and styrene can also leach from polystyrene foam into foods and beverages. And yet, despite these known dangers, the world is producing more than 14 million tons of polystyrene each year. And Rhode Island's throwing away an estimated 4,000 tons of polystyrene foam each year. And as Senator Miller mentioned earlier, it's important to focus here on what's recyclable and what's not. Polystyrene foam is not recyclable in any meaningful way. The plastics and chemical industries have claimed recently that so-called groundbreaking technology can use pyrolysis to recycle polystyrene, but that just isn't supported by the facts. There's only one facility in the country that's tried to use this process to convert polystyrene back into its building block, styrene. But public records show that in 2018, the vast majority of styrene that was produced by this facility ended up being burned. Burning plastics just is not the solution to our plastics problem. Polystyrene foam isn't safe, isn't recyclable, and it just has no place in Rhode Island as a disposable food and beverage container. Again, CLF supports Senate Bill 36. With respect to Senate Bill 220, this bill would create a really much-needed bottle redemption program, or bottle bill, in Rhode Island. Right now, we're only one of 2 states in New England without a bottle bill. Because we don't have a bottle bill, we're doing a poor job collecting our bottles and cans for recycling. We're only recovering about 39% of our beverage containers through curbside recycling. Compare that to states with bottle bills, especially the two states in the country that have 10-cent deposits in their bottle bills, and those states are Oregon and Michigan. Oregon and Michigan collect more than 90% of their bottles and cans to be recycled. And because we're not collecting our bottles and cans or enough bottles and cans for recycling, so many of them are ending up in the central landfill or in our environment. We as a state are throwing away about 17,000 tons of cans and bottles every year. These are cans and bottles that can and should be recycled. So many of us are familiar, especially based on experience with Connecticut and Massachusetts, how a system like this works. You pay a deposit when you buy a beverage. You get that deposit back when you return the empty container. But what happens after that point is equally, if not more important here. Beverage distributors take those empty containers from retailers and independent redemption centers. They reimburse the retailers and the redemption centers for each 10-cent deposit, and they also pay them a 3.5-cent handling fee for each container. The distributors then sell the source-separated bottles and cans to recyclers. Because these bottles and cans are source-separated and sold directly to recyclers, they're much more likely to be actually recycled into new bottles and cans. By contrast, right now in Rhode Island, none of the glass containers that we collect through curbside recycling are actually recycled. They're crushed and they're used as landfill container. And many of the plastic containers in curbside recycling are lost to contamination. They also aren't recycled. We can do much, much better with a bottle bill. And importantly, Senate Bill 220 has a few measures that help protect retailers and distributors, especially when it comes to attempts to redeem out-of-state bottles. Say bottles that were purchased in Connecticut, someone might try to redeem them for a 10-cent deposit here in Rhode Island. First, because retailers are reimbursed for their deposits, they can't lose money as a result of this. So there's no risk to the retailers that they're going to lose money from deposits because they're always reimbursed by the distributors. Second, this bill, Bill 220, allows bottlers to use state-specific labels so that retailers and distributors can easily spot out-of-state containers. Third, the bill requires the use of reverse vending machines, which help track people put their bottles and cans into these reverse vending machines to return them, and then they either get money or a receipt to then exchange for money for their deposits. These machines help track sales and redemption patterns, which can be used to help ensure system integrity. With these types of measures, Senate Bill 220 would create a sound and effective deposit return system. And again, the facts show over and over that these types of bottle bills drastically improve collection, improve recycling rates, keep containers out of the environment. And just quickly on Senate Bill 562, the 50-cent deposit on NIPS would be really a powerful incentive for people to return these NIPS to be recycled. One of the huge problems with NIPS is that even those that are collected for recycling can't be recycled at all. According to the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation, small NIPS containers can't be sorted through the single-stream recycling equipment at the materials recovery facility at the landfill. So all of these containers end up in the landfill, no matter where they go, trash or recycling. Senate Bill 562 can address that problem again through this source-separated, independent recycling system that a deposit return would provide. Thank you to Senators Valverde, Calkin, and Miller for introducing all of these bills. Thank you to the committee, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kevin. Does anyone have any questions for this witness? Okay. Seeing none, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate all of your information. And I believe, do we have written testimony from you as well?
You do.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm not getting any audio. I don't know about everybody else. I don't know if something happened, but I'm not
No,
hearing anything.
it's Senator. We were waiting for the next caller to be connected. Sorry about that. There was a little bit of a technical glitch. I believe we should have Dave McLaughlin with us.
Yes, I am here.
Hi, Dave. Thank you for joining us. If you want to share which organization you're representing and which bill or bills you're testifying on, and you can go ahead with your testimony.
Great, thank you very much. So thank you, Chairperson Oyer and the entire committee. My name is Dave McLaughlin. I represent an organization called Clean Ocean Access. We're an environmental organization focused primarily on Newport County. And I just want to provide a few brief remarks on the 4 bills in front of us tonight. S36, we certainly support the effort here for the disposable food service containers. Although I certainly want to give a shout out to the thousands of volunteers that perform beach cleanups and removing hundreds of cups and plates and bowls and tens of thousands of pieces of miscellaneous styrofoam. Remediation is not the solution. And unfortunately, the problems with polystyrene foam are so infinite in scope. It breaks down into millions of tiny pieces and impacts the health of our oceans, as we're all well aware of. So we certainly applaud this effort and want to really address the fact that turning off this spigot of runaway unnecessary single-use plastics is really a great thing that we're doing here. There really is nothing convenient about using something once that stays around forever. And it's great to just mention that other communities are looking at things like reusable takeout containers, and that's something that we'll be exploring locally in a pilot program once everyone gets back into action. So again, we support S36. In terms of the deposit bills, we certainly support all 3 of them. And specifically, S220, this is a responsible deposit program, and Kevin just did an excellent job pointing out all the merit for why this makes sense. Again, we've found tens of thousands of bottles, glass bottles, plastic bottles, metal bottle caps, all littered across the shoreline. So this is really good for the environment. It's good for the economy. It makes sense for the ocean. So we really applaud the effort to move that forward. And last but not least, we certainly support S562 with what I would call a more severe introduction of a deposit. It addresses an emerging issue that is really related to dangerous and/or illegal and/or inappropriate activity associated with these nip bottles. I certainly think that adding a higher deposit will allow there to be a stronger message that if these things are to be used, they need to be used in a very responsible manner. So we extend our appreciation, our support for the Senate committee tonight hearing these bills. We're happy to support them, happy to address any questions that you have.
Thank you, Dave. Does anyone have any questions for this witness? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much, Dave, for your testimony.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. And our next witness should be joining on the line shortly. And I believe we should have Jonathan Berard with us. Jonathan, are you there?
I am here, Chair.
Welcome to the committee. And if you want to tell us which organization you're representing and then which bill or bills you're testifying on, and you can go ahead with your testimony.
Great. Thank you, Chair Oyer and members of the committee. My name is John Berard. I am the Rhode Island State Director for Clean Water Action. I should also mention that I co-chaired the Governor's Task Force to Tackle Plastic Pollution that Senator Miller mentioned, and I also co-chaired the policy working group that came up with the policy recommendations. So I thank Senator Miller for his leadership on this issue, as well as my colleagues and other members of the legislature who have pledged action on plastic pollution. I speak today on behalf of our nearly 20,000 members here in Rhode Island, and we support S36, S220, S562. We also support S106 and recommend incorporating some of the measures that Senator Coyne had mentioned into S220. My time is short, so I just want to talk about recycling for a second. We've talked a little bit about it today. When the General Assembly last seriously considered a beverage container deposit bill a decade and a half ago, Those efforts got sidelined in favor of a single-stream recycling regime that promised to cure all of our recycling-related ails. According to Resource Recovery, the switch to single-stream has not resulted in the projected increase in recycling rates, and rejected recycling loads are costing municipalities and ultimately taxpayers. Providence pays roughly $1 million a year in fines and fees for rejected recycling, and when loads from Woonsocket, where I live, are rejected, it costs the city about $5,500 each time. So this current model is untenable, as several members of the committee and my colleagues have mentioned. And with plastic production forecasted to double or triple from today's levels by 2050, it is unlikely that it will get any better without a public policy intervention. In preparing my verbal remarks for the House a few weeks ago, I Googled, does recycling work? And the top returns from every single major news organization overwhelmingly found that it does not. We could also look at data from our own state, the Rhode Island Resource Recovery, to confirm these conclusions. Our state, our towns, our cities, and we as taxpayers cannot afford to keep footing the bill for this broken model, especially since we're projected to get more and more waste in future years. So this is a downstream problem, but we need to look far upstream for the solution, and that means source reduction. The policy solution for plastic pollution as it pertains to beverage containers does exist. It's extended producer responsibility, where manufacturers and brand owners have a financial responsibility for the end-of-life management of their products. Beverage container deposits are EPR laws, and the oldest deposit laws are some of the earliest EPR laws. They're not novel, they're not innovative. For decades, bottle deposits have proven to be successful. We've heard folks mention their experiences in Massachusetts and Connecticut already tonight. In states with strong bottle bills like Oregon, Maine, and Michigan, recovery rates are as high as 90%, which is good. As far as polystyrene foam is concerned, it's a particularly problematic product. I mean, Kevin talked a lot about why. We know the problems that it creates when it gets into the environment, and we know it's one of the most toxic types of plastics out there. But the end-of-life management of the product is really problematic, too. Polystyrene foam is not recyclable. It cannot go in curbside recycling bins. Rhode Island does have an industry-run take-back program, but it falls to the end user to bag up all of their clean foam and bring it to the central landfill in Johnston. I actually literally loaded up my family this morning to bring all of the packing material that we've accumulated over the past few months to the Eco Depot. Most Rhode Islanders don't have time to do this, nor do they prioritize it, because they're worried about other things, and rightfully so. And so residents are asked to throw these products in the trash instead. Most foam collected in this manner must be clean, which excludes the type of foam packaging, soiled food serviceware, covered by this legislation. And so the majority of the foam consumed in our state ends up in the landfill or is litter in the environment. Manufacturers have continued to externalize the social, environmental, and economic costs of their products. I also want to echo what Kevin alluded to, is that it's important to note that we are presently still in the midst of a global pandemic, and early on, food packaging manufacturers seized on the crisis in order to push the purported health and safety benefits of single-use disposables for food service. But to date, absolutely no evidence has been found that single-use disposable food products are any safer than reusable products. The CDC has found the risk of transmission of COVID through food and food serviceware to be, quote, very low, and recommends restaurants and food establishments continue to adhere to existing hygiene and food safety practices as the very best way to eliminate the risk of transmission. I can talk a little bit about NIPS, but I think, folks have kind of covered that. I've written testimony for that as well, but, they kind of fall under that, the problems that single-use beverage containers have as well. When Clean Water Action knocks on doors or calls our members on the phone, as we have been doing for the past year, the top concerns we consistently hear year over year is plastic pollution and the climate crisis, and we know that these two issues are not separate. It is clear that Rhode Islanders are demanding action on this issue, and we thank you for your attention to it. Container deposits work, polystyrene bans work. We are long overdue for both here in Rhode Island. These are both upstream solutions, source reduction solutions that we need to embrace now. I thank Senators Miller, Calkin, and Valverde, as well as the bill co-sponsors, for their leadership on this issue. We support passage of the bills, and we urge the committee's support. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has them.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for this witness? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
And the next public testimony should be joining us now.
Hello.
Hello, is this Omar Terry?
It is. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. If you could go ahead and let us know if you're representing any organizations as well as which bill or bills you're testifying on, and you can go ahead with your testimony.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon, Chair Orr and members of the committee. My name is Omar Terry. I'm the director of the Plastic Food Service Packaging Group with the American Chemistry Council. I'm calling to testify on SB 36 and to respectfully oppose the bill. We're just really concerned, to start off with, we're just concerned with a lot of the economic impact this bill is going to have on small businesses, especially restaurants, as well as the school community in Rhode Island. But we do have some advancements coming that will change the landscape. I do know that some people testified earlier about some of those advancements, but I'm not sure that they have the full picture. So allow me to provide that to you. We're talking about advanced recycling, which is an umbrella term utilized by our industry to talk about a lot of the types of technologies coming to bear to help recycle polystyrene foam and then plastics in general. This is a technology that is able to recycle plastics into plastics again or chemical feedstocks or waxes without using oxygen, so it doesn't burn into the atmosphere and has minimum air issues. This is a type of technology that comes in several different forms, one being pyrolysis, which I just explained, another being utilizing solvents, and then like a third option, being able to break down plastics and recycle them through microwaves and through radio waves. And so these are technologies that are coming to market throughout the country. A few examples of where that's taking place is there is a location in Oregon. The name of the company is called Agilix. It's a 10-ton facility, and they are recycling plastics and specifically recycling polystyrene foam and turning cups that they receive from venues for where you go to, from concert venues, and turning them back into cups. And they're also taking polystyrene foam, food serviceware, and changing them back into styrene to be turned back into polystyrene for use by consumers. Another location where this is starting to come up and running is in Atlanta, Georgia area. There's a company called Nexus Fuels, which is taking polystyrene foam and other types of plastics, and they are utilizing this technology to feed a quote unquote pipeline to Shell, so that they can take this post-consumer recycled plastic and put it into their processes to give back to their consumers for post-consumer recycled plastic. That is a process that's been up and running now for a few years and is getting to commercial scale. And then in Illinois, there's a company called Styrofoam that is building a 100-ton per day polystyrene foam recycling plant. They would not spend that type of money and that type of capital on something that they don't believe is going to work. That's not how companies work, as you all know. So this is going to be a 100-ton-a-day facility that they're building currently, and once it's operational, it will be the largest recycling plant for polystyrene in the world, at least to my knowledge. So those are projects that are ongoing. Beyond polystyrene, you have a company in Virginia that is taking plastics and turning them back into feedstock, chemical feedstock, as well as fuels. And the types of fuels that come from this type of technology is often has less of an air impact than traditional fuels. So it is a great diversion technology to help us get to electric vehicles, but not everyone can afford electric vehicles. So this way people would be able to purchase a fuel that's going to have less of an impact. And we're seeing these types of technologies being supported by states. We do have a bill in Rhode Island that we would hope to be looked at by the legislature to see if it'd be a good fit for Rhode Island. But other states that have passed advanced recycling bills include Florida, Wisconsin, Georgia, Iowa, Tennessee, Texas, Ohio, Illinois, and most recently, Pennsylvania. And so with that, I know you guys have a lot on your plate. Let me go ahead and stop and see if there are any questions. But if not, I appreciate your time and allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much. Do any members of the committee have any questions for this witness? Senator Miller.
Yes, I just wonder if in the regions that you discussed that those technologies are being developed, can you give us an example of what percentage of polystyrene they're absorbing from that region?
So that's a great question. Some of that data I'd have to go back to different companies to get, sir, because what happens is they sign what's called an offtake agreement with different entities. Sometimes those entities happen to be a MRF, so it's part of like the recycling and the waste stream. But sometimes those entities are a company itself, like Best Buy, where they're taking the polystyrene that packs your TV, and they're able to take that and ship it in. So each company is going to be a little different. Those offtake agreements are typically seen as competitive, so they don't really like to say how many offtake agreements they have or with whom, because in a market full of competitors, it's really just about making sure that your competitor doesn't know about all of your sales data. As far as the amount, the INEOS facility in Illinois will be able, once it's up and running, it would theoretically be able to take the majority of what Illinois is producing as far as polystyrene is concerned. But where they have those offtake agreements that could be beyond Illinois, I do not know, and so I want to make sure to get that information for you. For the Agilex facility, it's a 10-ton per day facility, so it's not nearly as large, and so I don't believe it would be able to take the full weight of the entire state. But it is definitely making a dent in its specific region of the state.
So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the data that we currently have on the amount of polystyrene that in any way is recycled or used for energy output or reverting back into other products is still less than 1% nationally. And I would imagine at a plant like the one you're talking about in Illinois and elsewhere, because of the contamination of food service polystyrene, it would be low, if zero, on their priority for the type of product they would be looking at. And it would be more likely the example that you gave, packing materials from a non-food service retail facility such as Target, I think you brought up, and anywhere globally that these type of facilities have always targeted what you have talked about as those large, bulky, used for TVs, washing machines, other things like that. That type of polystyrene rather than the food service, which is contaminated and inappropriate for the type of facilities you're talking about.
Well, so the good news about these facilities, Senator, is that actually they are designed to deal with the contamination. So you're right in the sense that when it comes to mechanical recycling, there's definitely issues when it comes to any type of food service ware and contamination because of, General Tso's chicken or, food scraps that are in there. And that is an issue for polystyrene foam food service as well as any type of food service. But with these advanced recycling technologies, that contamination is much less of an issue. And for, a lot of food service where that is not an issue at all, right? And the reason for that is because of how the technology works. It is literally set up to, take a polystyrene foam clamshell that has your last General Tso's chicken in it. Let's say you've got that densified. It goes off to this advanced recycling facility in Oregon. What the Oregon facility does, Agilex, is it takes this, brick of polystyrene, throws it into its facility, and it heats it and melts it to the point where it becomes a gas. And it's critical to know that there's no oxygen in this process. So there's no incineration. There's no burning, and we want to keep that gas, and so there's not going to be any expulsion into the atmosphere. The gas is the product that we want, so it's a closed system. And once this brick has been melted to the point where it becomes a gas, that contamination of the General Tso's, General Tso sauce, is siphoned out of it because it's literally no longer part of it. And then that gas becomes a liquid that can then be utilized to become styrene monomer, which is the building block of polystyrene. And that is a type of process called pyrolysis, as you know, that is able to take the types of contamination from food service ware. So where mechanical recycling, there's an issue when it comes to all forms of food service ware and contamination. For advanced recycling, plastics that are contaminated, that contamination is no longer an issue, especially in like the food service ware market. There would be an issue of contamination if you're coming from like the building and construction market, but then you're dealing with, pipes and bricks and, metal bars and so forth. And so that's a very different type of contamination that this advanced recycling technology wouldn't be able to handle. But for the food service ware component, advanced recycling really is a game changer. And, fully admit that there have been some hurdles when it comes to mechanical recycling. Advanced recycling technologies, that's no longer an issue. And as these facilities are being built and coming up to scale, you'll start to see those numbers change.
Senator Miller, did you have any follow-ups?
Oh, it's just also has been brought up by advocates that the cost of transport to existing plants would be prohibitive.
So that's the reason why there's these off-take agreements are very important for these companies, because they want to make sure that they're going to get enough supply. And so while food service is going to be a part of that supply, Senator, there's also going to be different types of supply, from post-industrial and other post-consumer markets.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions for this witness? Senator Valverde.
Thank you, Chairwoman. And what are the byproducts of these alternative recycling technologies that you talked about?
Excellent question, Senator. For the pyrolysis component, the primary byproduct is char, and that's really just it's char. Think of it as like burnt wood, right? It's just a carbon, and so that's the primary byproduct.
And what happens to that byproduct?
Right now, they're looking for for off-takes to take the char to be utilized in different types of, markets such as agriculture and so forth. But if they don't find any off-takes, then it would go to the landfill. I think a key component here to understand, though, is that for the amount of plastics that are being recycled, the amount of char produced is very, very small, extremely limited. I'll have to get that number from my colleague who is actually in charge of our advanced recycling technologies and research. But the ratio of plastics recycled to char produced is, the char produced is minuscule. But to answer your question, if they don't have an off-take, it would go to the landfill.
Okay. And there must be emissions of carcinogens or other greenhouse gases coming out of these plants. Could you address that?
Yes. So with the pyrolysis, there is no emissions. What we're trying to do, let me back up. There's no emissions because the product ends up turning into a gas, and typically the air emissions that you're talking about, is like gas that's sent from a plant into the atmosphere. We want to capture that gas, so it's not going to go anywhere. So the system is a closed system. There's not any air intake because there's no oxygen in the system. You are melting a substance without allowing oxygen into the system, and because of that, we're melting it to very high degrees, but you basically if you remembered your science class, you're changing a solid product into a gaseous product, and then you cool it into a liquid product. And all of that happens in this closed system where there's no air intake, right? So there's not going to be any air emissions for consumers and constituents to be concerned about. And I think it's important to know that for the states that did pass advanced recycling legislation, all of these facilities still have to meet air and water codes of those states. So they're still regulated like any other manufacturing facility or process in those states by their state's department of their state's EPA.
Okay. And so then this gas or liquid that results from this process, what is done with that?
So then that is the building block that plastics are generally made from, right? So it's the polymer, it's the monomer, it's the polymer, it's the liquid that plastics are generally made from. So, for an example, when you are getting like when you're getting a plastic bottle, right? Typically, you have to drill into the earth, and then the plastics are taken from the byproducts of drilling for oil. Well, and then you have a converter that makes pellets, or you have a resin producer that makes that resin, and then that resin becomes pellets, and then that pellets becomes a bottle, then that bottle goes to the consumer. Well, what this advanced recycling technology does says, okay, now that the consumer's done with the bottle, instead of drilling for new resin, virgin resin, because consumers are really wanting post-consumer and recycled products, what we can do now is take this bottle that is done with the consumer, we can run it through our advanced recycling process, and we can siphon out the orange soda that used to be in there, and we can turn that bottle into this gas that turns back into that liquid, and then that liquid from this advanced recycling plant is the exact same liquid of the same virgin quality that we would have to drill for. But you don't have to drill for it anymore because you're able to take it and get it from the bottle because you just changed the bottle back into its original chemical shape of being this resin. So not only does this advanced recycling technology help to recycle, but it's also a diversion technology, meaning we don't have to drill as much in order to meet the needs of consumers. So it's a recycling technology, it's a diversion technology. And then you're able to take that monomer and that polymer from this advanced recycling facility and then send that back to a converter who's going to make the pellets and then make the water, the orange soda bottle, and then go back to the consumer again.
Okay, but do you agree it's best to reduce the demand for these products in the first place, as this bill is seeking to do, rather than coming up with this whole system of burning these plastics?
Well, so we're not burning the plastics, and I want to make sure that point is understood. Like, we're not burning the plastics as far as like waste to energy is concerned, or just burning it out in like the air for it to just melt away. We are melting it to a high degree. That's absolutely correct. But it's in this closed system that allows us to change it back into its chemical building blocks of, a liquid and a gas that when it was drilled out of the earth, we change it back into that. And so, yes, it does divert from the need to drill as much into the planet. But another point I want to make sure that everyone understands, because I think this gets lost in translation, is, there are some people who believe that the industry is expanding just to expand, and that's not the case. the main drivers of the expansion of the industry is population growth on a global scale, and people want their Starbucks cup, right? So there is that increased use, and so what we're saying is that don't cap us, because we just don't know what we're going to need to do to take care of other countries. We're not even talking about the United States. I mean, frankly, the market in the United States has been flat for a few years. But we do need to address the concerns and the wants of other countries. And so that is where a lot of the drive for building some of these plants is coming from, is really population growth and an increased amount of people entering the middle class.
Now, doesn't it take a ton of energy input into these facilities to even do what you're suggesting?
Great question. So that's gonna be dependent upon the type of facility, right? So if we go back to the beginning, there's three that I know of. There's probably more, but there's the pyrolysis bucket. Then there is like the solvents bucket, which is chemicals, and then there is like the microwave bucket. So those are just like the three ones that I know, but I think that there's more technologies out there. For the pyrolysis plant, right? So it will need a kickstart from the grid, or however you're going to power these plants. It needs a kickstart, but honestly, once it gets kickstarted, it's self-sufficient, because it's able to take like the chemicals produced and like the polymers and so forth, and turn it back into itself. Like the heat that's generated, it's able to utilize that for its own energy production. So I know that that's a major big talking point, but these technologies have been able, especially in the pyrolysis field, they've been able to become self-sufficient. And I can send you some data on that if you're interested in seeing it, because we're seeing those types of technologies come online to make these plants self-sufficient. So yes, it does take a kickstart to get going, but once it gets going, it's good. You've got those offtake agreements. They're bringing in the product, in this case, used water bottles, used clamshells, and then it utilizes that process of changing the clamshell back into the monomer to be changed into a clamshell again. It's able to utilize that process as a self-sufficient process to get off the grid.
Thank you. Senator Valverde, do you have any follow-ups?
Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for this witness? Thank you, Mr. Terry. Appreciate your testimony. I think the two things that I just want to raise out of your testimony, and this isn't a question, but this is just a comment, both the fact that one of the comments that you made was that this is actually a byproduct of oil drilling, and I think that that's something that we're trying to move forward from and get away from. And then the other point of concern I wanted to raise about issues that you raised in your testimony was while the pyrolysis may be a closed loop process, what you're articulating as far as the energy production for it to become self-sufficient, I think then does create emissions, which I think is, kind of the point of the whole system concern, that it's not looking at one part of this process, but the entire conversation about single-use items is not really necessarily a sustainable economy, and also going to get us off of fossil fuels. So I do anticipate that committee members will want to follow up with you about questions as we move forward on this topic, and I do appreciate your information and the expertise that you bring to us. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome, Senator. I appreciate the questions from the committee, and please definitely follow up with our government relations team. We'd love to provide any answers that we can.
Thank you so much. And I believe that we have our next member of public testimony who will be providing public testimony, and I believe we have Meg Kerr with us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name is Meg Kerr. I'm the Director of Policy at the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, and I'm here to speak in support of really all these bills today. I'll start with Senator Miller's bill on the food containers. I want to point out, in response to the previous speaker, that even if the pyrolysis is the solution, you still need the product to arrive at the plant. And we know right now the recycling that we do, we get about 30 to 40% of our cans and bottles away from the consumer and to our MRF. So let's say we were equally successful with polystyrene food containers and got 40% of them to some plant, which I would have concerns about. But I would just point out we would still have probably 60% of those containers out in the environment, breaking down and contaminating our waterways and our soils. So that would be a concern. I think John Berard, in his testimony, mentioned that he collects his polystyrene foam and drives it to the Johnston landfill. And I agree with his assessment that most people probably won't do that. And I did also look at the Resource Recovery website, and they provide for Rhode Islanders the opportunity to mail your polystyrene to the nearest collection site. And it does mention that there are no sites in Rhode Island and that you, as the collector of the polystyrene, are responsible for the postage. So I think that is a non-solution to the polystyrene. So we very much support this bill to eliminate the polystyrene in the food service containers. On the bottle bills, like the previous folks who have testified, we'd like to see the two bills merged. And I just wanted to point out that the Audubon system, we've had bottle bills discussed at the legislature for decades. And although I have only been at Audubon for about 5 years, Eugenia Marks, my predecessor, was there for 30 years. She probably testified for most of those 30 years in favor of bottle bills. They're a good idea. And they've been a good idea while all of our neighboring states have passed bottle bills, and we have not. I think one of the things that we need to think about is we don't think about the cost of the current system that we have of throwaway, no deposit, no return beverages, not recognizing that taxpayers are paying for the cost of disposing of these beverage containers in the municipal waste streams. And they're paying for the costs of our curbside recycling. So taxpayers are bearing the burden of dealing with this waste. But refundable deposit, as these bills would create, the consumer, not the taxpayer, pays the deposit, and the deposit is refunded, but the container is returned. And then the beverage distributors or bottlers absorb that cost of collection, and they can choose whether to pass that cost back to the consumer. And we know that a lot more, 70% or more of the deposit containers are returned. Senator Valverde mentioned that she grew up in Connecticut. I grew up in the state of New York, and New York has a very effective bottle bill. And when you go to a park or go to a beach or drive along the highway in New York, there aren't any bottles, because it's not because people don't throw them out the window of their cars. New Yorkers are no different than Rhode Islanders. Of course they do. But people collect those bottles and make money by returning them to the stores and getting that deposit. So there becomes a mini industry of collecting these returnable bottles and collecting that deposit. And at least in New York, the bottles are returned right back in your grocery store. So there's no need to drive to a place that you wouldn't normally go to get rid of your returnable bottles. On the NIPS, I totally agree that it is time to get the NIPS off the roadsides. We all know if we walk or run around or enjoy parks that they're just littered with these NIPS. And we fully support Senator Miller's bill to put a deposit on the NIPS and get them out of the environment. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Meg. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Meg, and thank you as well for your patience. I know you were on hold for a little while.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And I believe we are now joined by Christian Roseland. Christian, can you share with us what bills you'll be testifying on and if you're representing any organizations? You can go ahead with your testimony.
Sure. I'm testifying in favor of S36, and I'm not representing any organization. So thank you, Chair Oyer, and members of the Environment and Agriculture Committee for the opportunity to testify yet again. I feel like I'm getting to know all of you. My name is Christian Roseland. I'm a resident of Providence, and I'm a parent. And I'm here to testify in favor of S36. To be clear, I support Rhode Island putting a deposit on bottles as well, and either bottle bill, S220 or S106, but I haven't looked at those bills in the same detail. In terms of the ban on Styrofoam, I support this for many of the same reasons that I gave in supporting the ban on plastic bags. Plastic pollution is a serious environmental issue. It's a danger to marine life, and it's also potentially a danger to human health. And for Senator Coleman, I do have links to the study that found microplastics in the placentas of unborn children. And that's the issue, is that Styrofoam, or polystyrene, is plastic. A big difference between Styrofoam and the other kinds of plastic is that Styrofoam breaks down more easily and faster into small pieces, and these pose a particular danger to fish and other marine life. Now, other speakers have talked about a lot of the issues with Styrofoam, including how it is not recycled and how impractical it is to attempt to recycle it. But I want to talk about something a little closer to home. I'm wondering how many of you have children and how many of you have gone fishing with your kids. I fished a lot with my male relatives growing up, and my son likes to go fishing. He's really unhappy about his record of not catching fish, but I'm sure that he'll get better, and he will. But I can't say the same for his kids, because the amount of plastic that we're putting into our waterways and oceans is choking marine life. A study published 4 years ago by the World Economic Forum found that by 2050 there will be more pounds of plastic in the world's oceans than fish. I want you to think about that for a second. More plastic in the oceans than fish at the rate that we're going. I've seen the evidence of where this is going because I've done beach cleanups in Providence and Riverside, and I've seen the enormous amounts of Styrofoam and other forms of plastic that wash up year after year. And the truth is that we just don't need it. I personally don't get takeout from restaurants that use Styrofoam containers. That means I go to fewer restaurants and get takeout. And there are some restaurants, very few, but there are some that put their food in paper or aluminum containers, or, basically this cardboard lined with wax. So it can be done. I also want to address briefly the comments made by the plastic industry lobbyist who spoke earlier. There were a lot of bogus arguments made, and I won't be able to address all of them, but I do want to talk about the technological solutions that were put forward that are in the nascent or pilot stage. I wrote as a journalist about technology for 10 years regarding renewable energy. And I want to tell you that it's a long way from PowerPoints to power plants. And a pilot project does not mean that a technology is ready for widespread commercial deployment. As for these facilities, we've heard the best arguments about them made by an advocate for the plastic industry and not a neutral analysis. I didn't hear a lot about the amount of energy used by these facilities. And I heard a little about primary byproducts, but I didn't hear a full and neutral accounting of the byproducts that these facilities will release. So I think it's great that they claim to want to capture all of the gases emitted when they melt the plastic and do pyrolysis, but I'm not convinced that they do. And so I'm glad to hear that this is a closed loop, but we're basically being asked to take their word for it, and we're being asked to wait on unproven technologies that have only been deployed in pilot plants to address an urgent environmental problem. But that's not even the biggest problem here. The biggest problem here is the issue of collecting all of the polystyrene and getting it to these facilities. Look, it's not happening now with recycling, and I've heard no plan that would allow us to collect all of this polystyrene and actually get it to these plants to be turned into pyrolysis. So It's not being collected or recycled in any significant quantity today. It's not going to be anytime soon, and it may never be. So the idea that we should wait and not ban styrofoam because of these science fiction technologies is frankly a bogus argument. And it's just more stalling by an industry that has been polluting our oceans for a half century. So in short, I support S36. I think it's an important step towards leaving a state and a world that is more decent and less nightmarish for our children and our children's children. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Christian. Is there any, go ahead, Senator Archambault has a question or a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to amplify on what Christian said. I held my comments back, but in past years, I've listened at length to gasification advocates, those who talked about incineration. I even signed on to an incineration bill once at the landfill that would have been located somewhere down near there. But back to the comments that Christian had mentioned, the gasification really is in its infancy. And all I keep thinking of is that if it really did exist, if this were out there and the closed loop system could contain all the byproducts like this ash that, you know, the gentleman before talked about as a likened to like wood ash or whatever. Well, that's not the stuff that I'm reading and the stuff I looked at before. You're talking about very harmful byproducts that are going to be released into the atmosphere that, contain all sorts of harmful synthetic gases that byproducts of synthetic gas from the combustion. So it's really a technology that needs to be developed. And I think that Christian hit the nail on the head. We're not going to wait for something like that to try to do what we can to be more environmentally friendly and to control the amount of plastics and styrofoam that's put out in the environment. It seems to me it needs to be a symbiotic process. If this gasification really has merit, then the technology will be developed. And when it is fully developed and the plants are able to be built, I'm sure it'll be brought before many different states as something with this closed loop system that has very little downsides except for the amount of energy it uses, and maybe even that can be addressed. And by that point, maybe we'll have much less waste out there for styrofoam and plastic products because of legislation like Senator Miller's. So I think the argument from the gentleman from the prior testimony was circular. Now, he did a good job. He's a bright man, probably has an engineering background, but it was circular. I didn't hear anything that went down with roots in it about technology that could be developed today and help us today. So I appreciate Christian's testimony very much.
Thank you, Senator Archambault.
Are there any other questions or comments for this witness? Okay. Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Senator Archambault, for those comments. And we are waiting for our next caller. And I believe we are being joined by Bree Dietley. And I apologize if I got your name wrong, but Bree, if you want to let the committee know if you're representing any organizations and what bill or bills you are testifying on.
Thanks, Chair Oyer. It is Bree Dietley. Did pretty well. I'm here representing tonight. I work for Northbridge Environmental, which is a consulting firm in Boston. And I'm here representing the Rhode Island Beverage Association as well as the American Beverage Association. Our member companies produce refreshment beverages in and around Rhode Island, soft drinks, teas, juices, and sports drinks. Our member companies employ about 600 Rhode Islanders, and we are actively involved throughout our sort of production and design and recovery systems in producing and retrieving our bottles and cans. We spend a great deal of effort in the design of our packaging to make sure that our bottles do come back. We want our bottles back so that we can make them into new ones. We have made commitments as an industry to do that and to utilize more recycled content in our bottles as companies. You've heard a primer earlier this evening on the potential promise at least, of chemical recycling. And let me be clear that we are not looking to have our bottles go into pyrolysis or other chemical procedures. We want to physically get our bottles back and have them turned back into new bottles because that's how they're designed. Our industry has invested in a new campaign called Every Bottle Back, which is a fairly diverse effort to promote investment in recycling, our own direct investment, as well as promotion of recycling, and also policy advocacy. For a long time, our industry has supported producer responsibility type systems. We do not believe that it should be the responsibility of taxpayers to shoulder the cost of recovering our products. And we have a number of policies out there that we advocate for, ranging from full producer responsibility for packaging to, believe it or not, deposit systems. Our focus is on putting into place good policies to get back bottles and cans. We are testifying here on Senate 106 and 220. We are not in support of the two bills that are before you, but not because they are deposit bills, but because the design of these programs really isn't consistent with what we view as best-in-class deposit systems that are out there. There are dozens of deposit systems around the world, in countries and provinces and states. Most of those follow a pattern that's quite different from the one that's laid out in these two bills. The sort of distributor-based retail take-back handling fee structure that is common in the Northeast in the U.S. Is really kind of an artifact of a much earlier time and a different industry and a different consumer base and a different product base, really, than we have today. We believe that a properly designed deposit system looks a little bit more like a product stewardship system, more like a producer responsibility-driven organization, where there's a producer group that's accountable for the performance of these systems rather than hoping that they do well. Your next-door neighbor, Connecticut, has the worst-performing deposit system in the country. Last year, they redeemed about 44% of their bottles and cans through their deposit system. That's not the 90% that the advocates were advocating earlier. And the reason is that the system is poorly designed and it's being poorly operated, and nobody's responsible for doing better. We look more to the models in Canada or to the cooperative system that's being run in Oregon as systems that we could support on the deposit side if the legislature ultimately decides it wants to use deposits to bring back containers. Those systems, again, as I said, have centrally managed structures. They leave to the producers the design of the redemption infrastructure. We don't need reverse vending machines in supermarkets designing the front doors of every store in the state to take back empties. Combinations of redemption centers and of other kinds of more innovative redemption options can relieve retailers of a lot of the expense and hassle. And frankly, consumers, are going to choose the kinds of places they want to redeem containers. We shouldn't just assume that every single store needs to have a bunch of reverse vending machines in the front because that's what we're used to or that's what we grew up with. I did too, but the systems have changed and consumers are really not using those systems. That's why we see the low redemption rates in Connecticut and Massachusetts. And we see higher redemption rates in places like Oregon that have more innovative systems. I do want to talk a little bit about the deposits. First, about the unclaimed deposits. In these bills, the unclaimed deposits are taken out of the system and plowed into other state programs. It is a core element of our principles that a deposit and return system is not an ATM for other programs. As a product stewardship system, the funds that go into a deposit return system need to be kept in that system. So consumer money that's paid in that is not redeemed should be used to defray the expenses of that system. And that is the common element. That is a common element of deposit systems in most parts of the world. It's really only here in the East, in the U.S., where we've decided to use those funds for other purposes, general fund or otherwise. And even if they're sort of chosen to use for an elevated purpose, they end up usually in the general fund. So we feel very strongly that those need to be kept in the system. And we also have a lot of concerns about the assumption that a 10-cent deposit for Rhode Island would be a good idea. Again, Rhode Island, as you know, is surrounded by deposit states that have 5-cent deposits. And having a state with higher deposit is not a very good idea from the standpoint of encouraging fraudulent redemption or cross-border redemption from those other states, as well as driving business out of the state. If it costs now less to buy a beverage in Rhode Island, you know that the stores in Rhode Island are already benefiting from the fact that consumers from Massachusetts and Connecticut come there to buy them and save money. If the reverse is true, then Rhode Island businesses would be at a disadvantage to the neighbors because they would have a higher deposit in Rhode Island, and you'd be attracting empties in from surrounding states. So at the very least, if a deposit system were established in Rhode Island, it would be very important to have the deposit consonant with the surrounding state as opposed to being a higher one. So I do want to emphasize that, as an industry, we support a wide range of systems and of policies and of programs to get our bottles and cans back. As I said, we know not every state in the United States is going to have a deposit system. We know not every state is going to want to tackle EPR for packaging. So we're making other investments in recycling and are kind of doing a range of things in a portfolio approach to get our containers back. I do a lot of work around the country in deposit states. I manage 2 redemption co-ops, one in Maine and one in Vermont. So I'm happy to answer any questions about our position, and also if there are any questions about sort of how the deposit systems work, I'm happy to answer those as well. So thank you for your time. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Do any members of the committee have any questions? Senator Miller.
Yes, I wondered if you were around for Meg Kerr's testimony where she talked about how the current recovery rate to the landfill without a deposit is about 40%.
Yes, I did hear that.
So do your programs have any impact on that rate, either in Rhode Island or elsewhere?
The programs that we're supporting now?
Yeah.
Well, we're making investments in certain markets right now around the country. We haven't invested specifically in Rhode Island. So no, we're more targeting our investments in other places. But the policies, a policy, whether it was EPR or deposits in Rhode Island, would affect that rate. We at various times have sort of put forth proposals to improve recycling in Vermont. We work with the Recycling Partnership, which has worked with Rhode Island to improve its recycling and reduce contamination in recycling in the state. So we're contributing in that way. But I would say that, if the state does choose to go the route of deposits, all of those containers would be taken out of the municipal system and they would run through the deposit system instead.
Yeah, the point I'm trying to get to is you're involved with programs either in Rhode Island. You talked about 500 people employed here, and part of their responsibility is to get the rate higher than 40% of those plastic-related containers or aluminum-related containers to the landfill or back to the distributor with a deposit system. And I'm just wondering, in the states that do not have a deposit system, what percentage impact, better than the 40-60 we have in Rhode Island, has any of those programs made?
Well, there are states that achieve, if you look at Connecticut as a deposit example at 44% redemption rate, there are a number of states in which our industry and others are involved where the recycling rate of those containers is higher than it is in some deposit states. I think it's really important to not sort of say that every state that has deposits are the same and every state that doesn't are the same. The infrastructure, the structure of the deposit system has a huge impact on how well it works. And we have deposit systems in the U.S. that range from a high of 88% in Michigan to 44% in Connecticut. So just the advocacy for the policy isn't enough to make sure the policy is working well. And that's why for us...
One of the examples given was Michigan, where the deposit is 10 cents and therefore it's a very effective deposit system. So how much of Michigan, which you pointed out, is a result of the high deposit or a result of the programs that you have that are separate from the deposit system? Any idea?
The 88% redemption rate in Michigan is the redemption rate for deposit containers.
Right.
So those are the containers that are subject to the deposit. It is a high rate. It only affects, however, beer and carbonated soft drinks in Michigan. The deposit system there does not affect water, juices, teas, wine, or liquor. So that's a very limited system in Michigan.
So you would recommend it be expanded to those other containers?
In Michigan?
Yeah. To make it more effective?
If the program were redesigned to be more accountable and to be more kind of bulletproof to fraud and other issues, that might be a good idea. But we would support, again, it matters how the system's designed, and that's really the point I'm trying to make here.
But a 10 cents is a better design based on the Michigan example. I also...
I'm sorry, I have to disagree with that.
On adjoining states, if you were to talk about the states in the region, what would you give as the best example if a legislator was to design a better system than, say, Connecticut within the region to be compatible with what's going on in the region?
I would argue that the structure of the system in Oregon is the best, and I realize that's on the West Coast.
Not in the region.
Yeah. We are in the process of and working with the Environment Committee, the Joint Environment Committee in Connecticut, and with DEEP in Connecticut and a number of stakeholders to redesign the Connecticut system. I mean, that is a priority for us this session. We have legislative language we're working on, and we are trying to get that system changed around to be more of that design. It's time for the systems in this region to sort of come into the 21st century, and we're hoping for that to be a model for the region.
So that redesign in Connecticut, is that still have a deposit component to it?
Yes, I'm talking about redesigning the deposit system. That's our objective here in the region, is to do that. But we don't think that the 10 cents isn't necessarily the key to having the program be effective. The structure of the program needs to be right, and then it can determine whether, in the context of the borders and other sort of market considerations, whether 10 cents makes sense or not. It does not in Connecticut, we believe, because of the proximity of New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey to their borders, and I would argue the same for Rhode Island.
Yeah, but I would look forward specifically if you have a better model in a Northeast state. I think everybody would be interested in seeing that. And if Michigan with a 10 cents is the closest example you can give us at 90%, reasons why the legislators who have this deposit legislation wouldn't look towards that model if it's at almost a 90% rate. But I don't expect you to do that right now, and there might be people with other questions, and I'm sure there are other people waiting on the line. So, but you can get us to that would be great.
Thank you, Senator Miller. Are there other questions for this witness? And Bree, were you able to provide us with written testimony? I was just looking through, and
I did, Senator. Yes, you should have written testimony from me.
Okay, great. It sounds like there's some follow-up questions that the committee has. So if you can provide us with any of that additional documentation, and I'm sure that folks will have additional follow-up questions for you. Are there any other questions from committee members for this witness? Senator Valverde.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to say I would be very interested in hearing, more in-depth details about these other systems that you say are more effective. You mentioned a system in Canada that was effective, so I would like to hear more about that, and if you could follow up with that in either now or in written testimony, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I'll just say briefly in support of that, is that we have the industry has there's information written up about the organ system. I can provide that. There are, again, all the systems across Canada are different. It's really probably best to focus on a U.S. system because of some of the differences in product distribution in Canada versus the U.S. So the Oregon model is really the best that we can point to in the U.S., with the main difference being that Oregon is not a nonprofit organization that runs their system, and we believe that the deposit system should be run by a nonprofit organization. But otherwise, the Oregon model is a pretty good one for us to follow, and one that's pretty consistent with programs in Europe, especially the newer programs that are being developed in Europe and the UK, Scotland, and other places.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments or questions for this witness? Okay, thank you, Mr. Dietly. We will be following up. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good night.
And I believe we have Michael Noel. Michael, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Hello. Thank you
Can you
for
hear?
joining us. Yes, if you can let us know which organizations you're representing and what bill or bills you're testifying on, and you can go ahead with your testimony.
Sure. So thank you for having me, Chair. I am the Governmental Affairs Manager for TAMRA, and I am here to speak on S220 and S106, the container deposit legislation. What I can talk about is how the systems work both in the U.S. and around the world. Just a way of background here, TAMRA is a global recycling innovation company. So we provide a range of technology and services for both the curbside and deposit recycling industries, and we're active in over 80 markets around the world. When it comes to deposit return systems for recycling, we are active in all 10 U.S. states that have a deposit system, many of the high-performing systems around the world, including Norway, and we are very active in nearly every link of the deposit value chain in the northeast of the U.S. So we provide reverse vending machines to retailers and redemption centers. We provide material pickup services on behalf of beverage distributors. We own a number of processing facilities throughout the Northeast that help to sort cans and bottles further and sell them back to manufacturers to be recycled. And we own a PET plastic recycling facility. So we are intermediaries in deposit systems. And so as that, we are not taking a position on either of these bills, but we're just simply here to be a resource for the committee on how systems work elsewhere and the impacts Rhode Island might see. In terms of why deposit systems are put in place, it's mainly due to reduce litter, or it started out that way, but they have a knock-on benefit in that they are extremely effective at collecting items for recycling, and that diverts them from the waste stream, of course, as well as ensuring they are actually recycled and can divert them from being littered in the environment. So to put some numbers to that, 27% of U.S. containers without a deposit are collected for recycling, so that's 27%, versus 72% of containers in the U.S. with a deposit are collected for recycling. So that's almost 3 times as many cans and bottles. And then there are deposit systems out there that can collect 90% or more of deposit containers. Deposit systems collect the material, but their second benefit is that they're able to preserve the material value of the can or bottle because it is kept clean and then is source separated by material. And this tends to be different from your traditional single-stream curbside recycling operation, which can have issues with contamination. And I do have commodity data comparing the curbside system with the deposit stream system in my written testimony for all 3 deposit materials. And as I mentioned, there are high-performing deposit systems that collects 90% or more of deposit containers. And Tom actually just wrapped up about a year of research on those high performers because we see there's a resurgence of interest in deposit systems, not only in the U.S. I mean, there's 2 federal bills right now that propose a national bottle bill, but also around the world. And what we found is that these high performers that collect 90% or more of containers, they prioritize 4 principles, and they're helpful for the committee in terms of designing a system. They prioritize performance, setting a collection target, and a broad scope of beverage packaging, plus a meaningful deposit value to incentivize the public to participate. They prioritize convenience. So if you place a deposit on an item, it needs to be easy, accessible, and fair for the public to get their money back and to participate in recycling. Third, they prioritize producer responsibility. These are EPR programs after all. So producers manage and finance the system, but they're also able to use the unredeemed deposits and commodity revenues to invest in the system, making it the best it can be. And finally, they prioritize system integrity because these systems do handle a lot of money, and there's a number of different stakeholder groups involved with different interests. And so it's important that trust is built into the system itself, and the high performers do that through transparency, through a data-driven clearinghouse, which is the entity that clears the deposits and handling fees, and they embrace reliable redemption technology to verify each container. And so I know we're hearing a lot of bills tonight, so I'll keep it short there, but I just wanted to offer up Tamara's expertise on deposit systems, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you. Do any of the committee members have any questions for this witness? Senator Miller. Senator Miller? Senator Miller, you're still muted. I'm not sure if we're able to unmute from our end. All right, do any other members of the committee?
Okay, sorry,
okay.
I had a glitch technically here. Sorry, I went to click and everything disappeared. But I just give him the same question that I gave the last person, and he can give us some information later on what the best examples might be in the region if somebody was going to look at this legislation.
Sure. In the region, well, I mean, it's, the highest performing system in the U.S. is Michigan, and their model is largely successful because there's a strong incentive for people to participate with a 10-cent deposit value, and it's extremely convenient, being that retailers participate in the take-back. There's more to it than that. There's a lot of collaboration between the beverage industry out there, Tamra, as well as a major recycler in the state that has made it kind of a well-oiled machine. So that's unique. Oregon is the second most effective, run by beverage producers, and had an innovative system out there or innovative concept in the law that stipulated if the redemption rate fell below 80% for 2 years, then the deposit value would automatically increase. And so that's why Oregon is seeing success as of late. So it kind of makes the law evergreen, if you will. In the Northeast, Maine has the highest return rate, if I'm recalling correctly, at around 84%, and includes a number of expansive containers. So yeah, we usually point to Michigan and Oregon for some of those trigger reasons.
Thank you. Are there any follow-up questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much for your time. And I believe we are now joined by Hank Webster. Hank, if you can please share what organization you're representing, as well as what bill or bills you're testifying on, and you can go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Oyer. My name is Hank Webster, and I am testifying on behalf of the West Greenwich Land Trust. I am the volunteer chair, and we have not historically participated in this type of activity, but this is an issue that we gripe about every single year when we do our Earth Day cleanups. And so I just wanted to testify in support of all of the bills as a slate, because we annually see the pollution that's left on our roadways out here, and like Senator Archambault, we are also tired of doing it. We enjoy protecting our lands and trying to clean up the sides of the roads, but there's obviously a better way. As other witnesses have testified, other states are doing this better. It flabbergasts me that we have not had a bottle bill. And in particular, I want to speak to the NIPS problem. We see that all over the place out here, and it's always the same brand and the same spot. So clearly it's a pattern, and there are a lot of benefits to also curbing that activity. There's one, also another nuance that perhaps hasn't been covered, but in West Greenwich, like other communities, we have a transfer station that is obviously municipally funded through taxpayers, and the transfer station pays a tipping fee for each bin that it brings to the landfill, to the central landfill, and if there's contamination, then there's penalties. And so one of the other reasons to support this is if we have a better way, a more sustainable way of avoiding either the contamination of those containers, and just avoiding it from entering the waste stream and possibly getting dumped into the landfill itself, then that's going to pay dividends to all taxpayers, whether it's West Greenwich or elsewhere. And also, when we're doing our Earth Day cleanups, it's really not logistically possible for us to separate the trash that we're picking up. We're picking up car parts, we're picking up paper towels, we're picking up plastics, cans, all of that, and we're not going to carry around 4 or 5 different bags per person to make sure that they're separated, and it would be a massive job at the end of that cleanup to do it. So just another good reason to support this bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Hank. Do any members of the committee have any questions for this witness? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much, Hank. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
And we're waiting for a minute to be connected with the next witness. And I also did find the testimony from Bree Deatley. We have him listed as being from Northbridge Environmental, but if you want to look, if the committee members want to review in their packets of written testimony, there's testimony with the header of Rhode Island Beverage Association, but it's also the subject line is statement of Bree Deatley to the Senate Committee on Environment and Agriculture. So I'm not sure about that distinction between the organizations, but it does look like we do have Mr. Deatley's testimony. And now I believe we're joined by Nicholas Feedy. Excuse me. We're now joined by Jeff Barron. And
hi, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you for joining the committee. If you want to go ahead and let us know what organization you're representing and which bill or bills you will be testifying on, and you can go ahead with your testimony.
Yeah, sure. My name is Jeff Barron. I am representing Wakefield Liquors in Wakefield, South County. I've been there for over 21 years as the general manager, and before that, in college, I worked at a liquor store in Boston. So, regarding the container deposit bills, I don't see why, it should be government mandated to us to become a recycling center. It doesn't make any sense. You need to hire extra people to work. I know when I was in Boston, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday mornings, we would have to hire extra people because many of the locals would walk around and gather the college students, thrown away beer and wine bottles, and then they would be brought in the next morning. And that really wasn't conducive to selling, wine and what we're supposed to be selling to make a profit and, keep people gainfully employed. obviously I'm all in for recycling. I recycle here in my house in Providence all the time. But I don't feel that it should be mandated by the government for us to have to become a recycling center and take this on for the community. If local towns want to put in a recycling center, I'm all for that, and we would help out any way we could. But I don't feel that should be put on us. I've also, when speaking with suppliers and wholesalers, they have said, in regards to 562, the NIP, the 50 milliliter deposit, that they would, if it's enacted on 50 milliliters, they will just stop selling 50 milliliters and sell 100 and 200 milliliters more aggressively, and it wouldn't solve the problem. So I thank you for your time. That's all I have right now.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate your testimony and sharing your concerns with us. Do any of the members of the committee have any questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Barron. Appreciate your time.
Yep. Have a good night. Thank you.
And I believe we will have our next witness is Jed Thorpe. And Jed, if you want to share what organization you're representing and what bill or bills you'll be testifying for.
Sure. My name is Jed Thorpe, and I'm the Advocacy Coordinator for Save the Bay. And we support all the bills on the agenda tonight. However, I will keep my comments mostly focused on Senate Bill 220, the bottle bill. As many of you know, one of the ways that Save the Bay fulfills our mission to improve and protect Narragansett Bay is by coordinating volunteer shoreline cleanups around the state. And we conduct those cleanups from spring to fall, but our biggest cleanup effort is a largely one-day international coastal cleanup event that takes place every year in September. In 2019 alone, our volunteers removed 6,842 plastic beverage bottles, over 3,000 glass bottles, over 8,000 plastic bottle caps, over 3,000 metal bottle caps, and over 21,000 small plastic pieces. Again, that was a mostly one-day event. And those are only the numbers for what was removed from the shoreline, and it doesn't reflect all the items that were swept out to sea or ingested by shorebirds or other marine life. Plastic pollution isn't just a coastal problem in Rhode Island either. Our rivers and streams are littered with bottles. If you take a walk around your neighborhood tomorrow morning or tonight, it won't take long to notice a plastic bottle along your street. And if you talk to the city and town employees who are responsible for cleaning storm drains, they can attest to just how badly they can clog up city and town stormwater infrastructure. And I'll also note that every single water body in Rhode Island where we've taken a sample, whether it's a coastal water body or an inland water body, microplastics have been found. And because of what we know about how water flows into and out of the bay, we know that the vast majority of the beverage containers being removed from our beaches are coming from right here in Rhode Island, which means that the actions that we take in Rhode Island will have a direct local benefit. Save the Bay, we're experts on the Bay, but frankly, we're not experts on the beverage industry or how bottles get recycled. I'll simply note that with 40 or 50 years of real-world examples of how these programs have worked or perhaps not worked in other states, there's certainly enough information out there to draw upon to craft a system that works here in Rhode Island. So I hope that the question is more of how to get this right than whether or not we're going to do anything at all, because the status quo is clearly not working. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jed. Appreciate your testimony. Do any committee members have any questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Jed. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And just so the committee knows and the public knows, we do have probably about maybe 3 to 4 more witnesses, and we're working on reaching out to them now, but just for planning purposes for the committee. And I believe we should have Dan Culkin with us. And Dan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome to the committee. If you're representing an organization, if you could let us know, and if you could tell us which bill or bills you're testifying on.
Hi there. I'm representing myself, and I'm testifying specifically on 562, but I would like to also voice general support for all the other bills tonight, the Styrofoam bill and also the 2 bottle bills. I'd like to see all of that move forward in the most efficient form that can get through the legislative process. Just a little background, I've gone to various locations, mostly in Warwick, to pick up trash at a rate of about 100 times per year for the last 4 years. I usually work by myself, but I also join events run by organizations like Save the Bay, the Pawtucket River Authority, the Buckeye Brook Coalition, and others. And I'm testifying on 562 specifically because of some work that I did in November of 2018, for which I have provided written testimony. But basically, over the course of 3 weeks in that month, I personally removed over 2,700 nip bottles from roadsides and publicly owned property in the city of Warwick. For example, I'll be brief, along the 1.5-mile stretch of road in front of Morris Farm on Warwick Avenue, which is a well-known location here in Warwick, I removed 182 nip bottles. And that was from an area which had been thoroughly cleaned earlier in that spring by another local group who did a pickup. So we're talking about 9 months of accumulation. Then another extreme, I also removed 224 nip bottles from around a very small parking lot, probably only 50 feet across on each side, at the Passyonquist Cove Fishing Access boat ramp. And by the pattern of those, it seems like somebody would just go there every day, drink some nips, throw the nips out of their car window, and then drive off. So I have a lot of experience, not at the legislative or the financial end of the bottle return issue, but as boots on the ground doing cleanup. But I will also mention, as Janine said earlier, Janine's my wife, that I grew up in Massachusetts where we had the bottle bill, and I'm really longing to have the same sort of thing here in Rhode Island. So I'm here to present that testimony data and also answer any questions people might have from somebody who has done a lot of on-the-ground cleanup the last couple of years.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony. And does anyone from the committee have any questions or comments for this witness? Senator Valverde.
Hi, Daniel. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your commitment and dedication to keeping your local area free of garbage in these bottles. It really is amazing that you spend so many days out there picking things up. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for this witness? Okay. Hearing none, thank you, Dan. Appreciate your time. And with that, that is actually, we had about 3 other witnesses who did sign up to testify in opposition. However, we've called them numerous times and they have not answered. So just for the record, we did have Nicholas Feedy Jr., who's representing the Rhode Island Liquor Store Association, who signed up in opposition to Senate Bill 220 and Senate Bill 562. We also had Craig Panardo from Main Street Wine and Spirits, who had signed up in opposition to Senate Bill 220 and Senate Bill 562. And we also had Jane Costanza with the United Independent Liquor Retailers of Rhode Island, who is also in opposition to Senate Bill 220 and Senate Bill 562. I'm unsure if they've submitted written testimony. As I think many of the committee members know, if we get late written testimony, it tends to get collated and it will be forwarded to all of the committee members tomorrow. So I I appreciate the vibrant discussion on these bills. It sounds like the sponsors have some follow-up conversations to have with many of the people who testified tonight. And so I look forward to hearing from the committee members and the bill sponsors about the outcome of their work on these respective bills. We have already held the bills for further study and have no other business in front of the committee tonight. So with that, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Senator Archambault moves to adjourn, seconded by Senator Rogers, and all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.